I have stood many posts in the royal house of Harrowgate, and I have learned that the loudest thing a great hall can ever hold is silence. Not the hush before a king speaks, not the pause that swells before a trumpet. I mean the other kind, the silence that falls when a room full of powerful people suddenly understands that something is wrong, and every one of them decides in the same breath to look at their own hands instead of at the child who is weeping. That is the silence I want to tell you about. I was there. I saw who broke it, and I saw what it cost him, and I have never once regretted that it was not me who moved first, because the man who moved was better at being a man than I have ever been at being a soldier. His name was Corporal Edrin Vale. On the night the hall fell silent, he was posted at the north pillar of the Amber Hall, which is the tall banqueting room the house uses for its grandest occasions, the vaulted one with the gilded ribs across the ceiling and the long windows that throw the sunset in like spilled wine. I was posted at the south pillar, directly across from him, close enough to read his face if he had ever let it be read, which he did not. We had stood 100 nights like brothers who never speak. You come to know a man that way. You learn the weather of him. The occasion was the betrothal announcement of Lady Verena, the Queen Consort's daughter, to a lord of a northern house. It was, on paper, a night of celebration. 300 guests, musicians in the gallery, tables the length of small rivers, laid with the good gold, the plate that only comes out of the vaults for a sovereign's pleasure. King Alaric sat at the high board beneath the arms of his house. Beside him, in the seat that had once been the late Queen Isolde's, sat Queen Consort Morwenna, straight-backed and jeweled and smiling the smile she had made famous, the smile that reached her mouth and stopped there, the way a tide stops at a wall. I tell you all this so you will understand the machinery of the room. It matters. Everything that happened because of where people sat, and who was allowed to be near whom, and which small person had been placed exactly where she could be most easily forgotten. That small person was Princess Maelin. She was 9 years old that winter, the daughter of Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Alara, the eldest of the 3 royal children. Her brothers Torin and little Bram had been excused early. Bram was only 6 and had already fallen asleep against a footman's shoulder by the fish course, and Torin, 11 and restless, had been sent to bed after knocking over a goblet. But Maelin had been kept. Kept, I would later understand, on purpose. She had been seated not with her mother and father, who were placed near the high board, but far down the table among the lesser guests, in a chair that was slightly too tall for her, so that her feet did not reach the floor and swung a little when she thought no one watched. She wore a dress of pale blue, and around her neck on a fine silver chain hung a small locket, an oval of worn silver, plain among all that court gold, but she touched it the way you touch the one true thing in a room full of pretend. I knew that locket. Every guard who had served Isolde's household knew it. It had been the late Queen's, and inside it, they said, was a lock of hair and a painted thumbnail of Rowan as a baby. When Isolde died, Maelin had been 4, the locket had passed to the child, and Maelin had worn it every day since, tucked usually beneath her collar where no one could see. That she wore it openly tonight over the blue silk told me she had dressed herself brave. A little girl at a grand banquet, alone at the wrong end of the table, wearing her dead mother's locket where the light could catch it. That is a kind of courage the court does not have a medal for. Vale saw it too. I know he did, because I watched his eyes go to her once, just once early in the evening before the toasts, when a footman had leaned too close to her, and she had flinched and covered the locket with her small hand. Vale's eyes went to her and then forward again, and nothing in his face changed, but I had stood beside that man for 3 winters, and I felt him settle a fraction, the way a hound settles when it has decided which corner of the yard it will watch. The toasts began. Lord Cassius rose first, Morwenna's son, a smooth and heavy young man who spoke the way a man pours syrup, slowly and with pleasure in the pouring. He toasted his sister Verena. He toasted the northern lord. He toasted the king at length, and the king inclined his head. He toasted, last of all, the future of this house, a house renewed, a house looking forward, no longer bowed beneath the shadows of the past. And at the word shadows, I saw several of the older courtiers glance, very briefly, at the empty place on the wall above the high board. Because there was an empty place on the wall, a pale rectangle on the stone where, for years, the portrait of the late Queen Isolde had hung, the one where she is painted in the garden with a young rowan on her knee. It had been taken down for cleaning, the household had been told 3 weeks before. It had not come back, and in the pale ghost of its absence tonight, someone had hung instead a great swag of the Queen Consort's own colors, plum and gold, so that the wall belonged to Morwenna now, from floor to vault. Maelin was looking at that wall. I saw her look at it. A child does not miss the place where her grandmother used to be. Then Morwenna rose to speak. She let the hall settle. She was very good at that, at making 300 people wait for her so that when she finally opened her mouth it felt like a gift. She spoke of family. She spoke of the future. She spoke of gathering the treasures of this house into worthy hands, that they might be kept as they deserve, and not left in careless keeping. And here, for the first time, she let her gaze travel down the long table, past the lords and the ladies and the northern guests, all the way down to the too-tall chair where a 9-year-old girl sat with her feet swinging, and one hand crept up to her collar. "There are keepsakes," said the Queen Consort, "that were never meant to be trinkets for a child to lose. Treasures of the late Queen, may she rest, that belong to the house, and to its history, and not on a ribbon around a little neck where they may be broken or misplaced or worse." She smiled. "I have asked that they be returned to the house's keeping tonight, where the court may see them honored properly. It is a small thing, but it is the right thing." Maelin, dear, and the whole hall turned, 300 faces, toward the small girl at the far end of the table. "Come and give your grandmother's locket to me, so that it may be kept as she would have wished." I have replayed that moment more times than I can count, and I still do not have a word cruel enough for what it was. Because it was not a theft, you understand. It was worse. It was a theft dressed as kindness, performed before 300 witnesses, so that any refusal would look like a spoiled child clutching at a bauble, and any tears would look like a tantrum, and the woman doing it would be seen, forever after, as the patient guardian of the house's honor. Morwenna had built a trap out of good manners, and she had baited it with a dead woman's memory, and the person standing in the jaws of it was a child of 9. Maelin did not move. I watched her small hand close around the locket. I watched her look down the length of that table to where her father and mother sat, but Rowan and Alara had been seated too far away, past the corner of the high board, and between them and their daughter stood a wall of standing footmen and a swag of plum and gold. And by the time Rowan half rose, Cassius had already leaned to murmur something in the king's ear, and a steward's hand had come to rest, oh so gently, on the crown prince's shoulder, as if to say, "Not here, not now, do not make a scene of it." That is the machinery of a court. A father can be kept from his own child by nothing more than the fear of a scene. "Maelin," said the Queen Consort again, and now her voice had the soft, terrible patience of a woman who knows she has already won. "Don't be difficult, child. Bring it here." And the little girl at the end of the table began to cry. Not loudly. That is what I remember most, that she tried, even then, not to make a sound. She was 9 years old and alone at a banquet and being asked, before the whole court, to hand over the last warm thing her dead grandmother had left her. And she understood. A child understands these things faster than adults ever credit. That if she wept, she would be the one blamed for the ugliness of the moment. So she pressed her lips together, and she held the locket in both hands, and the tears simply came, running down her face and dropping onto the pale blue silk, and she made almost no sound at all. And the hall fell silent. I do not mean the music stopped, though it did. The gallery musicians faltered and let their bows drift down. I mean the other silence. 300 people who had, an instant before, been the most powerful gathering in the realm, all at once had somewhere else to look. They looked at their plates. They looked at the wine in their cups. They looked at the gold and the candles and the pale ghost on the wall where a good woman used to hang. Lords who had led men in war found their napkins fascinating. Ladies who ruled great houses studied their rings. Not one of them, not one of 300, met the eyes of a weeping child, because to meet her eyes would be to be seen not helping her. And it is a strange truth about powerful rooms that the fear of being seen not helping is stronger than the wish to help. The Queen Consort stood at the high board with her patient smile, and waited, and let the silence do her work. And across the hall from me, at the north pillar, I saw Corporal Edrin Vale take one breath. You have to understand what a guard of the house is at a moment like that to understand what that breath meant. We are not permitted to move. We are not permitted to speak. At a state banquet, a guard at his pillar is furniture that can bleed. He is there to be a symbol of the house's order, its stillness, its unbreakable calm, and the first rule bred into us from our first day is that we do not ever insert ourselves into the affairs of the family we guard. A footman may serve. A steward may murmur. A guard stands. The whole meaning of us is that we do not move for anything less than steel. There was no steel in that hall. There was only a small girl crying without a sound, and 300 people deciding not to see her. Vale broke every rule we had. He came off the north pillar. He did not hurry. I want to be exact about this, because it mattered enormously that he did not hurry. He did not stride or lunge or make of himself a spectacle. He simply stepped out of his stillness and walked, at a measured, deliberate pace, the full length of that vast hall, his boots the only sound in all that silence, past the lords studying their napkins and the ladies studying their rings, the whole 300 watching now, watching a royal guard in the red tunic and the tall bearskin walk out of his post, and down the length of the amber hall toward the child at the end of the table. I saw Cassius half rise. I saw a steward's mouth open. I saw the Queen Consort's smile stay fixed, but her eyes went sharp, because whatever she had planned for this night, she had not planned for this, and the great gift of Edrin Vale was always that people could not plan for him, because they mistook his stillness for emptiness, and it was never empty. He reached the too-tall chair, and there in front of the whole court, a royal guard of the House of Harrogate did a thing no guard is ever supposed to do. He went down. Not a bow is a movement of the court, a movement of politics. He went down on one knee, on the cold stone floor of the amber hall, so that his face was below the level of the weeping child's face, so that a girl of 9 did not have to look up to a towering figure in a bearskin, but could look, if she chose, straight across into the eyes of a man who had come the length of a silent hall for no reason on earth but her. And in that silence, lo, so that only she and I and perhaps the nearest guests could hear it, he said the first words anyone in that hall had said to Princess Maelin, as though she were a person and not a problem. "Your Highness," said Corporal Vale, "I've been sent to guard something precious tonight. I think it's that locket. Will you let me?" Maelin looked at him. Her face was wet and blotched and her chin was trembling, and she was still holding the locket in both fists against her chest, as though it were a small bird she was trying to keep from being taken. And she did not answer him with words. She could not, I think, her throat had closed. But she looked at the man on his knee in front of her, this enormous red and black figure who had come down to be smaller than she was, and something in the awful, frozen loneliness of the last minute broke open, and she gave one shuddering nod. "Thank you," said Vale, as gravely as if she had granted him a lordship. "Then I'll do it properly." And here is the second thing he did that no guard is supposed to do, and it was cleverer than the first, though I did not understand its full cleverness until later. He did not take the locket. If he had taken it from her, even to protect it, he would have finished the Queen Consort's work. The child would have been parted from her mother's gift, and it would only have been a question of which hand held it. Instead, he reached up slowly, so the whole hall could see there was nothing hidden in his gloved fingers, and he unfastened his own guard's collar, the high stiff collar of the house uniform, with its single small silver clasp at the throat, a clasp given to every man of the guard on the day he swears his oath, stamped with the arms of the house. He took that clasp off his own collar, and he fastened Maelin's silver chain to it, so the locket now hung from a guardsman's clasp, and then he closed her small hands back over it. "There," he said. "Now it isn't a child's trinket. Now it's under the guard of the house, sworn and sealed, and no one in this hall may lay a hand on a thing the guard has taken under its protection, not without answering to the guard." He rose slowly, deliberately, drawing himself back up to his full height beside her chair, and he turned at last to face the high board and the Queen Consort and the king. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice carried now, flat and clear down the length of the silent hall. "Forgive the interruption, but this locket is now under the protection of the guard of the house, by the oath I swore to protect what is precious to this family. It cannot be surrendered tonight. If there is a claim upon it, let the claim be heard properly, in the light, before the king, and not asked of a child at a feast. I will remember the sound of the hall for the rest of my life. It was the sound of 300 people who had spent the last minute staring at their plates, all breathing in at once. Because he had done something extraordinary, and everyone in that room understood it even before their minds caught up with it. He had taken the thing Morwenna had framed as a matter of a child's obedience, and he had turned it into a matter of law. A child clutching a bauble can be scolded and stripped of it, and the court will call it discipline. But a thing under the sworn protection of the guard of the house, that is a different creature entirely. To take it now, Morwenna would have to overrule the guard's oath, in front of the king and 300 witnesses, and be seen to do it. He had not shielded the locket with his body. He had shielded it with the one thing in that hall stronger than her smile, the house's own law. Morwenna's smile did not fall. I have to give her that. She was a formidable woman, and she did not lose her composure cheaply. But her eyes had gone flat and hard as coins, and when she spoke, her voice had lost all its soft patience. "A guard," she said, "does not decide the affairs of this house. Return to your post, soldier, and we will forget this display." And King Alaric raised one hand. He had not spoken through any of it, through the toast, through the trap, through the tears, through the guard's long walk. He was an old king by then, and a tired one, and he had let his house run past him in 100 small ways that he had not the strength or the will to check. But some things reach even a tired king, and the sight of his granddaughter weeping alone at the end of his own table had reached him. He raised one hand, and the whole hall went still again, a different stillness now. "No," said the king, "let no one return to any post yet." He looked down the long table at the small girl and the tall guard beside her chair, and then at his consort, standing at his right hand in her plum and gold. "The guard is right in one thing at least," said Alaric slowly. "This is no matter for a feast. Maelin, child, stop your weeping. No one will take anything from you tonight. You have my word on it as your grandfather and your king." And at those plain words, the first kindness spoken to her aloud all night, the little girl put her face in her hands and finally, truly, wept, the way a child weeps when the danger has passed and it is at last safe to. Vale did not touch her. He simply moved a half step so that his tall red shoulder was between her and the whole staring hall, and let her cry behind the shield of him, out of sight. "We will hear this matter," the king went on, "properly and in private tomorrow. All of it." His old eyes moved once to Morwenna, and there was something in that look I had not seen in years, a flicker of the sovereign he had been before grief and weariness dimmed him. "All of it," he said again. "The locket and the portrait that has not come back from cleaning, and whatever else has been quietly gathered into worthy hands of late. We will have an accounting. Now the musicians will play, and my granddaughter will be taken to her rooms. And this house will remember for the rest of this night that it is a house and not a market." The gallery musicians, terrified, struck up something bright and wrong. The hall came slowly, awkwardly, back to life. 300 people pretending very hard that nothing had happened, that they had not all just watched a 9-year-old cry alone in a silence they had made. And Corporal Edrin Vale offered the Princess Maelin his gloved hand, and she took it, and he walked her the length of that hall again, the two of them, the tall guard and the small girl with a soldier's clasp holding her mother's locket at her throat, past the lords and the ladies, out through the great doors, and away from all of them. I did not see what passed between them in the corridor beyond. But I heard, later, from the nurse who received her, that when the Princess Maelin was handed over at the door to the royal apartments, she would not let go of the guard's hand until he had promised her one thing. "You'll guard it," she had said. "You promised you'll really guard it." "On my oath," Vale had told her, "every hour until the king says it's yours to keep forever, and I think," he had added, "the king is going to say exactly that. I have told you that this is the story of a silence and the man who broke it, but it is not, really, the story of one night. What happened in the Amber Hall was only the crack. Everything that mattered flowed out through that crack in the days that followed, and it went far deeper, and it climbed far higher than a locket and a portrait and a cruel toast at a feast. Corporal Vale had not merely embarrassed the Queen Consort in front of the court. He had, without knowing it yet, pulled at the first thread of a thing she had been weaving for years. And a woman like Morwenna does not forgive the man who pulls the thread. So let me tell you what came after. Let me tell you how the guard who knelt to a child paid for it, and how a tired old king found the last of his teeth, and how, in the end, a 9-year-old girl in a pale blue dress turned out to be braver than the whole silent hall put together. The reckoning did not come the next morning, as the king had promised. It could not, because by the next morning the Queen Consort had already moved. I learned of it at the changing of the guard. Vale was not on the roster. His name, which had been at the head of the North Wing rotation for 3 years, had been struck through and replaced. In its place, a posting order. Corporal Edrin Vale reassigned, effective at once, to the water gate, the river gate at the very lowest and dampest edge of the palace grounds, the post given to men in disgrace, where nothing happens and no one of consequence ever passes, where a guard stands alone in the mist off the water and rots slowly out of everyone's memory. It is the closest thing the house has to exile without the word. The order was signed by the steward of the household. But the steward of the household did nothing that the Queen Consort had not told him to do, and everyone in the barracks knew it. And by the time the morning meal was cleared, the whole guard knew that Edrin Vale had knelt to a child at a feast and been sent to the Watergate for it before the king had even risen. I went to find him. He was already packing his kit, folding his spare tunic with the same terrible neatness he did everything. And when I came in, he looked up, and I saw that he knew exactly what had happened and exactly what it would cost him, and that he was not sorry. "You'll be in the mist for a year," I told him. "Maybe more. She won't let you back up while she has the steward's ear." "Probably not," said Vale. "Was it worth it for a locket?" He finished folding the tunic before he answered. "It was never about the locket," he said. "You saw the wall, you saw the portrait gone. You saw where they sat the child down the table, away from her father where they could work on her alone. That was not a woman deciding on a whim to take a keepsake. That was a woman finishing something. The locket was the last piece of it she needed in her hand in public, so that no one could ever say it had been taken. I don't know what the whole of it is yet." He set the tunic in his kit and closed it. "But I know a campaign when I see one laid out on a table, and I know that a child was crying at the middle of it and no one moved. So, yes, it was worth it." He shouldered his kit. And then, at the door, he stopped and asked me the thing he had really come to say. "The locket's still on my clasp," he said. "I gave the princess my oath I'd guard it until the king ruled. Now they've sent me to the river before the king can rule. If I'm at the Watergate, I can't stand near her, so—" He looked at me steadily. "Will you stand where I can't? Watch the child. Not the locket, the child. If anyone tries to take it off her quietly in a corridor out of the king's sight, you send for me at the river and I'll come up whatever it costs. You understand me? A promise made to a 9-year-old is still a promise. It doesn't get smaller because they moved me downstream. I gave him my word. It was the easiest word I ever gave and the one I am proudest of. He went down to the water gate that afternoon, into the mist off the river, and the palace closed over the place where he had been like water over a dropped stone. But the king had said before 300 witnesses that there would be an accounting, and a thing said before 300 witnesses is hard to bury, even for a queen consort with the steward in her pocket. So Morwenna did what such people always do when they cannot stop a reckoning. She set out to control it. If there was to be an accounting of the late queen's treasures, then she would be the one to render it cleanly, completely, and in her own favor, before anyone could ask a question she did not like. And that is how the second act of the cruelty came to be dressed, once again, as a kindness. 3 days after the banquet, a proclamation went round the household. The Queen Consort, in her devotion to the memory of the late Queen Isolde, had commissioned a full and proper inventory of Isolde's legacy. Every jewel, every heirloom, every keepsake, that it might be catalogued, valued, and placed in the house's secure keeping for the benefit of the royal children until they come of age. A committee was named to oversee it, Lord Cassius, the steward, and a valuer brought in from the city, a soft gray man named Pruitt who bowed a great deal. The children's own guardians, Rowan and Alara, were, of course, warmly invited to attend, but the inventory would proceed on the Queen Consort's schedule in the Queen Consort's rooms with the Queen Consort's people, and the invitation, everyone understood, was the kind you decline by being made to wait outside. I did not understand at first why an inventory should be a weapon. An honest counting of a dead woman's jewels harms no one. It was the Princess Alara who made me see it, and she made me see it by accident, in a corridor, 3 days into the cataloging, when I was standing my watch near the children's wing, and she came out of the Queen Consort's rooms white to the lips. She stopped when she saw me. She knew me for one of Vale's friends. The whole house knew by then who had knelt to Maelin and who had been sent to the river for it, and she said, in a low, fast voice, as if she had been holding it in and could not any longer, "They are not counting them. They are uncounting them. Do you understand? Every piece Isolde left to Maelin, the pearls, the little emerald ring, the locket, Pruitt writes it down not as the child's, but as of uncertain provenance, retained by the house pending determination. Uncertain provenance. Isolde's own jewels, and once they are of uncertain provenance, they belong to no child at all, they belong to the house, and the house, she said, and her voice cracked, is her now. She is remaking my dead mother-in-law's will with a valuer's pen, one line at a time, and calling it care. That was the campaign. That was the whole shape of it, laid bare in a corridor by a frightened, furious mother. Morwenna was not going to steal the children's inheritance in a single grab that could be pointed to and named. She was going to erase it patiently, line by cataloging line, until Isolde's legacy was legally a blank, no clear owner, all of uncertain provenance, retained by the house. And then, when the dust settled and the court had forgotten to care, the house's treasures would quietly become the Queen Consort's to dispose of as she pleased. As dowries for her own children, as gifts to bind northern lords, as the foundation of a power that would outlast old King Alaric and shut Rowan's children out of everything but their titles. And the last loose end in the whole clean scheme, the one piece she had not yet been able to write down as of uncertain provenance, was a small silver locket, currently fastened to a guardsman's oath clasp, hanging round the neck of a 9-year-old girl, guarded by a promise she could not reach and could not break. Now do you see why she sent Edrin Vale to the river, not for embarrassing her, for putting one thing beyond her pen. I sent word to the Watergate that night. It was not easy. Messages to a disgraced man at the river gate are noticed, so I did it the old way, through a fish porter who came up from the water stairs each dawn with the morning catch, and who owed me a favor from a matter I will not go into. I wrote nothing that could hang a man. I wrote only, the pen is the weapon, uncertain provenance. She unwrites them one by one. The child's is the last, and I trusted Vale to understand because Vale understood everything, given the one true thread. The answer came up 2 mornings later, folded inside the fish porter's glove in Vale's small square hand. It said, "Then the will is the shield. Find Isolde's true will, not the inventory, the will. If she is unwriting what Isolde wrote, then somewhere there is what Isolde actually wrote, and it names the child. Find it before Priwit finishes, and the accounting the king promised has something to weigh against her ledger. Guard the girl. I am guarding the river. V***. The will, of course. If the whole scheme was a slow forgery of a dead woman's wishes, then the dead woman's real wishes, set down in her own hand, witnessed, sealed, were the one document that could shatter it. An inventory says what is, a will says what was meant. And if Isolde had truly left the locket and the pearls and the emerald ring to her granddaughter, in black ink and red wax, then no valuer's uncertain provenance could stand against it, and the whole patient campaign would be exposed for exactly what it was: a theft from a child, dressed in a cataloger's careful hand. But a will is only a shield if you can hold it up in time. And the trouble, which I discovered when I began, very quietly to ask, was that no one seemed to know where the late Queen Isolde's will actually was. It had been proved years ago at her death, everyone agreed on that. There had been a reading, the old chamberlain had conducted it, Rowan remembered being present, a young man numb with grief, hearing his mother's bequests read out in a room full of black. But the old chamberlain was 5 years dead himself now, and when I asked where the sealed original had been lodged, I got a different answer from every man I asked, and all of them uneasy. "In the strong room," said one. "With the house's legal men in the city," said another. "Return to the family," said a third, vaguely, and could not say to whom. And the steward, when Princess Alara herself formally requested a sight of the late Queen's will, for the children's inventory, replied, after a delay of 2 days, that the document could not at present be located, but that its contents were in any case superseded by the current cataloging, which the Queen Consort had kindly undertaken. Could not at present be located. That was when I understood how deep and how long this went, because a will does not simply wander off. Isolde's will had been the first thing Morwenna needed out of the way years ago, at the very start, before any inventory, before any locket, before Maelin was old enough to understand that her grandmother had left her anything at all. Make the will vanish, and you have a clean table. Then take your time. Then, when the children are still too young to fight and the king is too tired to notice, catalog the empty table into your own name, one careful line at a time. The banquet had not been the beginning of the scheme. The banquet had been very nearly the end of it. Vale had happened to stand up at the last moment of a plan a decade in the making, and jam his oath clasp into the closing jaws of it. I confess there was an evening about then when I thought we had lost. The will could not be found. The valuer Priwit worked on, room by room, ledger line by ledger line, and Isolde's legacy dissolved into, of uncertain provenance, a little more each day. The king, who had promised an accounting, had taken to his rooms with one of the long gray illnesses that came on him more often now, and while he was abed, Morwenna ruled the house unopposed, and the promised reckoning slid, day by day, further into the fog exactly as she intended. Rowan raged and was managed. Alara wept and was consoled. Cassius smiled. And down at the river a good man stood alone in the mist, guarding a gate that no one used. But I had promised to watch the child. And it was the child, in the end, as it so often is in this house, when the great and clever have all run out of moves, who found the thread the rest of us had lost. It happened because of the locket itself. Maelin, you see, had never once opened it. I said before that it held a lock of hair and a painted thumbnail of Rowan as a baby. That was what everyone said, what she had been told at 4 years old, and a child who has been told her mother's locket holds a treasure does not go prying it apart to check. She wore it. She did not open it. For 5 years she had worn it closed. But in the days after the banquet, that locket had become the most guarded object in the palace, fastened to a guardsman's oath clasp, watched by me at every hour I could contrive, the one thing Morwenna wanted and could not take. And a 9-year-old girl who has been through what Maelin had been through does not let a thing like that out of her hands. She had taken to holding it constantly, turning it, tracing it with her thumb the way you worry a stone smooth. And one evening, sitting up in her bed with the locket in both hands, tracing and turning, her small thumbnail caught the tiny catch on its edge. The catch no one had touched in 5 years, stiff with age, and the locket sprang open in her hands. She told me about it herself the next morning in the schoolroom corridor where I stood my watch, in the grave, confiding whisper children use for enormous things. There was the lock of hair, she said, dark and fine, tied with a thread. And there was the little painting of her father as a baby, no bigger than her thumbnail, just as she had always been told. But behind the painting, and here her whisper dropped almost to nothing, behind the painting, folded so many times it was no thicker than a leaf, pressed flat into the back of the locket, there was a piece of paper. "It has writing on it," she whispered. "Very small writing. I didn't read it, it's grown-up writing and it's all folded, but I think." She looked up at me with those solemn, grief-filled eyes. "I think my grandmother hid it. People hide the important thing in the safe place, don't they? And the safe place was the thing she gave to me. I have stood many years in this house and thought myself a clever enough man, and it took a child of 9 to say the obvious thing that none of us clever men had thought. Isolde had known. Of course, Isolde had known. A woman does not leave a great legacy to grandchildren without understanding perfectly well who stands to gain if that legacy is mudded. She had watched Morwenna at her husband's side for years. She was dying, not blind. And so the late queen, with the last cleverness of a clever woman, had not trusted her will to the strong room or the chamberlain or the house's legal men, all of whom could be reached. She had made her true will small. She had folded it down to the size of a leaf, and she had hidden it behind her baby son's painted face, inside the one thing she could give directly to the one person no schemer would ever think to search. A 4-year-old girl who would wear it closed for 5 years and never know she carried the whole game folded against her heart. The safe place was the thing she gave to me. I have thought about that sentence more than almost any other in this long affair. I did not let Maelin unfold it there in the corridor. I could not read it there, the light was wrong. My hands were not steady, and more than that, I understood at once that a paper like this, unfolded and read by a guard and a child in a corridor, was worth nothing. It had to be opened in the right place, before the right eyes, or Morwenna would simply have it named a forgery, or an old shopping list, or nothing at all, and have Maelin's word set aside as a child's fancy and mine as a disgraced guard's friend's lie. A shield only shields if you raise it at the right moment. Raise it too soon, in the wrong hands, and it is only a scrap of paper to be snatched and burned. So I did the hardest thing. I told the Princess Maelin to close the locket, and to keep it closed, and to tell no one, not her mother, not her father, not her nurse, no one what was folded inside it. I told her it was the most important guarding she would ever do, more important than anything a grown man could do, and that if she could keep the secret just a few days more, until we could open it in front of the king, then she would save her grandmother's whole legacy with her own 2 hands. She was 9. I was asking her to carry a terror alone, and she looked at me and set her small jaw and closed the locket with a click and said, "I already kept it 5 years and didn't even know. I can keep it a bit more knowing." Then I sent word to the river. Getting Isolde's hidden will safely before the king should have been simple, and it was very nearly the death of the whole thing because I made a mistake, the mistake of a man who trusts the machinery of a house to work the way it is supposed to. I thought, this is a matter for the king. The king promised an accounting. I will go through the proper channel, request an audience for the Princess Alara, have the locket opened before the sovereign, and let Isolde's own hand end it. Proper. Orderly. The way a guard is trained to do things. But the proper channel to the king's rooms, while the king lay ill, ran through the steward, and the steward was Morwenna's. So when Princess Alara's request for a private audience, on a matter concerning the late queen's legacy, was lodged, it did not go quietly to the king's bedside. It went first across the steward's desk. And within a day, the Queen Consort knew that Rowan's wife had asked, urgently, for the king's ear about Isolde's legacy, and knew, being no fool, that something had shifted, that Alara would not seek an audience over a lost cause, that somewhere a card had been turned face up that Morwenna had believed buried. She moved that same night, and she moved at the locket, because the locket was the only thing that had changed, and she had learned by then to trust her enemy's instincts even when she did not yet understand them. I have said I watched the child at every hour I could contrive. But no man can stand a post through the night and the day both, and it was in the smallest hours, when I had been relieved and another man stood the children's wing watch. A young guard, decent enough, but new, and not one of us, and not warned that the Queen Consort's woman came. Her name was Lady Sorrel, one of Morwenna's bedchamber women, a quiet gray creature who moved through the palace unremarked, and she came to the children's wing in the dead hour with a candle and a soft voice and a story ready, that the little princess had cried out in a dream, that she had been sent to comfort her, that the guard needn't trouble the nurse. And the young guard, God help him, believed her, because why would a guard suspect the Queen Consort's own gentlewoman, and he let her pass? What saved us that night was not a guard, and it was not me, and it was not the king. It was a 9-year-old girl who had been told by a man she trusted that she was doing the most important guarding of her life, and who had taken it, as children take such things, with a completeness no adult can match. Because Maelin was not asleep. She had barely slept since the corridor. She lay each night with the locket closed in her fist under the blanket, keeping her watch as fiercely as any sentry at any gate. And when Lady Sorrel's candle came softly through her door with its soft voice saying there now, "Sweeting," you cried out, "let me sit with you. Let me just hold that pretty locket while you sleep." Maelin did not cry, and she did not freeze, and she did not hand it over. She screamed. She screamed the whole wing awake. A bright, furious, terrified child's scream that brought the nurse out of the next room, and her brother Torrin stumbling from his bed, and the young guard back through the door white with the understanding of what he had let past him. And she screamed in words, the thing she had been forbidden to say, and now said at the top of her lungs because it was the only weapon a small person cornered in the dark has. She's trying to take it. Don't let her take it. It's grandmothers and she hid something in it help. Lady Sorrel got out of that wing very fast and very quietly, empty-handed. And by the time anyone thought to look for her, she was back among the Queen Consort's women with a face as smooth as milk, and a dozen witnesses ready to swear she had been abed all night. There was nothing to charge her with. A gentlewoman had gone to comfort a dreaming child. The child had taken a fright. These things happen. That is how it would have been written down if anyone had dared write it down at all. But two things had happened that could not be unhappened. The first was that Maelin had shouted, in front of her nurse and her brother and a guard, that there was something hidden in the locket. So the secret was a secret no longer, and the race was fully on, in the open, both sides now running for the same paper. And the second was that they had frightened the child in the dark, at midnight, over a keepsake, for the second time. And this time there were witnesses who were not 300 cowards at a feast but her own nurse and her own brother, honest people who loved her, and who came out of that wing shaking with a fury that would not be smoothed away by any smooth gray woman's alibi. I got the word at dawn. I did not go through the steward. I did not go through the proper channel. I had learned my lesson, and it had nearly cost a child her grandmother's last gift and possibly worse. I sent the fish porter down the water stairs at first light with 3 words for the Watergate tonight. They came, and I went myself straight past the steward's desk and the steward's protests, to the one door in the palace I had no right to approach, the king's sick room. They tried to stop me. Of course they tried to stop me. A disgraced guard's friend, a common man of the watch, demanding the ear of a sick sovereign. It was outrageous. It was against every rule of the house, and the steward's men would have carried me out bodily if I had not, in the antechamber, in front of a dozen people, said the one sentence I knew would carry through the door. "Tell the king," I said loudly, "that his son's wife asked for an accounting 3 days ago and has not been granted it, and that last night the Queen Consort's woman went into the Princess Maelin's rooms in the dark to take the late Queen's locket by stealth, and that the child had to scream the wing awake to keep it. Tell the king his granddaughter is guarding something at midnight that the whole house should be guarding in daylight. Then let him decide whether to see me." The antechamber went very quiet. It was, I suppose, my own small version of the guard's long walk across the amber hall. The moment you step out of your safe stillness and make the powerful people choose, in front of witnesses, whether to be seen refusing. The king saw me. He was propped in a great bed, gray and shrunken with his illness, an old man swimming up out of the long fog toward a thing that mattered. But his eyes, when they found me, were clear. I told him everything. I told him about the wall and the portrait, the too-tall chair and the toast, the inventory and Prewitt's pen and of uncertain provenance. The lost will and the steward's could not be located. And last of all, the locket that had sprung open in a child's hands to show a paper folded small as a leaf behind a baby's painted face. I told him his granddaughter had kept the secret 4 days alone because a guard had asked her to, and had screamed the wing awake at midnight to keep the thing safe for him to open. And I told him that the guard who had started all of it, who had knelt to the child in the silent hall, was standing at that hour in the mist at the Watergate, exiled before his king could even wake to rule. King Alaric listened to all of it without a word, and when I had finished, the old king closed his eyes for a moment, and I thought perhaps the illness had taken his strength and the moment was lost. Then he opened them, and he said, in a voice that was thin but did not waver, "Bring me my granddaughter. Bring me the locket. Bring me that valuer and his ledger and the steward and my son's wife." And said the king, and here the thin voice found at the very bottom of it the iron I had seen flicker once at the banquet and not since, "Bring me the guard up from the river. On my order, not the steward's. I find I want the man who was willing to lose his post for a crying child standing in the room when this house renders its accounts. Bring them all. This morning. Now." They assembled in the king's audience chamber before noon, and I will tell you how they stood, because a room, as I have said, tells you everything. The king sat in the great chair, wrapped in furs against the chill his illness gave him, but sitting up, upright, sovereign. Beside him, not above, not at his shoulder in her plum and gold, but placed by his own instruction a careful step down and to the side stood Queen Consort Morwenna, and her smile was in place, and her eyes went round that room counting exits and allies the way a general counts them. Cassius stood by his mother. The steward stood apart, sweating. The valuer Prewitt clutched his great ledger to his chest like a shield, and looked as though he wished very much to be anywhere else. Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Alara stood together, and between them, holding both their hands, in a fresh blue dress, with a small silver locket on a guardsman's clasp at her throat, stood the Princess Maelin, pale and frightened, and here anyway, because she had been asked to guard something and she had come to finish the guarding. And by the door, still in the damp river gray of the Watergate, mud on his boots, having been marched up from the mist an hour before on the king's own order and given no time to change, stood Corporal Edrin Vale, and when Maelin saw him her whole small body sagged with relief, and she would have run to him if her mother had not held her hand, and Vale looked at her across the room and gave her one small nod, the nod of a sentry telling another sentry, "I have the watch now. You did well. You can stand easy." Then the king's sister arrived, and the balance of the room changed again. I had not expected Princess Adela. No one had sent for her that I knew of, but Adela was the king's younger sister, sharp where he had grown soft, and she had a way of appearing in this house precisely when the house most needed a spine and least wanted a witness. She came through the doors in her traveling cloak, having ridden in from her own estates on some word of her own, and she took in the whole tableau, the sick king upright, the consort placed a step down, the frightened child, the mud-booted guard by the door with one long sweep of her clever eyes, and then she crossed the room and stood deliberately on the other side of Maelin from her parents, so that the child now stood shielded by her mother, her father, and a princess of the blood, and she said, to the room at large, in a dry, carrying voice, I heard my grandniece had to scream a wing awake in the dark to keep a keepsake her grandmother left her. I thought I had better come and see what kind of house we have become, that a child does the guarding while the guards are sent to the river. Her gaze found Morwenna and rested there, unhurried. Do go on. I should hate to have interrupted the accounting. Morwenna went on. She was, as I have said, a formidable woman, and she did not fold at the first pressure. She spoke smoothly of her devotion to the late queen's memory, of the great and thankless labor of the inventory she had undertaken for the children's own protection, of the sad confusion that surrounded Isolde's bequests. For the will, she reminded them all with a small regretful spread of her hands, had never been properly located after the poor chamberlain's death, and in the absence of any clear document, what could a caring house do but catalogue the treasures honestly, mark what was of uncertain provenance, and hold it all safe until the children came of age? As for the unpleasantness at the banquet and the sad scene in the night, well, children were fanciful. The Princess Maelin had been overwrought for weeks. It was precisely because the child had grown so unhealthily fixed upon a single trinket that Morwenna had thought it kinder to place the locket, with all the rest, in the calm and impartial keeping of the house. Everything she had done out of care. She hoped the king, in his wisdom, would see that. It was very good. I want to be fair to how good it was. Every fact she offered was true. It was only the shape she poured them into that was a lie, and if there had been no will, that shape would have held. The whole scheme had always rested on the one certainty that Isolde's true wishes could not be produced. Unwrite the will, and everything after it becomes a matter of interpretation, and Morwenna was the finest interpreter in the realm. Then King Alaric, who had listened to all of it in silence, turned his head to his granddaughter and said, very gently, Maelin, child, will you bring me your locket? And the whole room understood, in that instant, that this was the same request that had made her weep before 300 people at the banquet. Bring me the locket, child. And every head turned to see whether the girl would break again. She did not break. She looked up at Corporal Vale by the door, and Vale looked back at her, and gave her once more that small steadying nod. Then Maelin walked out across that great chamber, alone this time, no one holding her hand, a small figure crossing a vast floor exactly as the guard had crossed the amber hall for her, and she came to the foot of the king's great chair, and she reached up and unfastened the guardsman's clasp herself, and she put the locket into her grandfather's shaking old hands, and she said, in a clear voice that carried to every corner of that silent room, I want you to open it, grandfather, behind Papa's picture. Grandmother hid something there for us. I guarded it. Now it's your turn. I have seen strong men weep in this house, and I have seen a king rise from his chair with iron in his spine, and I saw both in the next few minutes, and I am not ashamed to say I could not see all of it clearly, for reasons I will let you guess. King Alaric opened the locket. His old fingers fumbled at the stiff little catch, and it was Adela who steadied his hands, and the tiny painted face of his son as a baby swung aside on its hinge, and there, folded down to the size of a leaf, pressed flat against the back of the silver for 5 long years against a child's beating heart, was a paper. He unfolded it. It took a long time. It had been folded so many times and pressed so long that the creases had nearly become cuts, and he opened it as tenderly as if it were an old wound, in total silence, the whole room holding its breath. And when it lay open at last across his knee, he looked down at it, and his face changed, and he said, in a voice gone suddenly rough, "This is Isolde's hand. I would know it anywhere. I read her hand for 40 years. He looked up, and his eyes had that iron in them now full and undimmed, the sovereign entirely awake. Chamberlain's clerk, read it. Read it aloud, every word, to this room. It was a will. Not the formal proved instrument that had been read out years ago and then made to vanish. This was something more intimate and more deadly. A holograph codicil, written entirely in the late Queen's own hand, dated in her last months, witnessed by two names the room knew to be honest and both now beyond any reaching, and sealed with the impression of Isolde's own ring pressed into a smear of wax gone brown with age. And in it, in the plain, unmistakable words of a dying woman who had seen exactly what was coming, Isolde had set down her true and final wishes for her personal legacy, asterisk not the houses to muddle, not the crowns to dispose, but mine and mine to give. And she had given it, every stone and every keepsake, item by named item, the pearls and the emerald ring and the rest, to her granddaughter Maelin and her grandsons Torin and Bram, to be theirs in law from the hour of my death, held in trust by their father until their majority, and by no other hand for reasons, the dead queen had written, that those who come after me will understand well enough. And then the last line. The clerk read it, and his voice shook, and I watched Morwenna's smile finally, at last, go out like a snuffed candle. Isolde had written, "To my granddaughter Maelin I give also my own silver locket, which she is to wear and never surrender, for I have hidden this very paper within it, knowing that the safest place in any house is the trust of a child, and knowing that if ever these words must be read aloud, it will mean the house has need of them. Guard it, little one. You are the keeper of the truth." She had known. 5 years before dying, the late Queen Isolde had known precisely what her locket would one day have to do, and she had made her 4-year-old granddaughter its unwitting keeper, and she had written a message across 5 years to the very moment we were living in, and it had arrived on time, delivered by a 9-year-old who had guarded it without even knowing what she guarded. There was not a dry eye in that chamber. Even Priwit the Valuer was weeping into his great, useless ledger. Even, I think, 1 or 2 of Morwenna's own people. King Alaric rose. He had not stood unaided in weeks. He rose now, out of the great furred chair, an old sick king pushing himself up onto his own 2 feet with the paper in his hand, and no one dared move to help him because it was plain he meant to stand for this, and he stood, and he faced his consort, and the room held its breath. "You told this house," said the king, and his voice was quiet and it filled every corner, "that the late queen's will could not be found. Here it is. It was never lost. It was hidden from you by a woman who saw you clearly at the end and who trusted a child to keep it because she did not trust you. Every line your valuer wrote is void from this hour. Uncertain provenance." He said the words with a contempt I had never heard from him. "There is nothing uncertain here. These children own their grandmother's legacy in law from the hour of her death, as she wrote it and sealed it with her own hand. It was theirs the whole time you were quietly signing it into your keeping." Alaric, Morwenna began. "You made a child cry," said the king, "in front of 300 people over her dead grandmother's locket and called it care. You sent your woman into her rooms in the dark to take it by stealth, and she had to scream a wing awake. And when one guard, out of a hall full of my sworn men, was the only soul with the honor to kneel to her, you had him sent to rot at the river before I could wake to thank him." The old king's hand tightened on the paper. "I have been ill, Morwenna. I have been tired and grieving and glad enough to let this house run itself while I looked the other way. That is my fault, and I will carry it. But I am done looking the other way." He gave his judgment there, standing, in the plain, unhurried words of a man who had made up his mind. The valuer's inventory was struck out in its entirety, every line of it, and Princess dismissed from the house's service before the hour was out. The steward, who had signed a disgraced posting for an honorable man on the consort's word, and lodged an urgent audience where the consort could read it, was relieved of his office and his keys that same day. The late Queen Isolde's true will was carried, under the guard of 2 of my own men and witnessed by Princess Adela, to be lodged and reproved properly in the light, so that never again could it be quietly said to be unlocatable. And every jewel and keepsake that had been catalogued away into the house's keeping was ordered returned to Rowan's trust for the children, item by item, against Isolde's own list, the pearls, the emerald ring, and all the rest. As for Morwenna herself, the king did not shout, and he did not have her dragged out, for that is not how this house falls or rises. He simply stripped her, quietly and completely, of the things she had spent a decade building, her authority over the household and its treasures. Her committees were dissolved. Her people were removed from the children's wing and the strong rooms and the king's own antechamber. Lady Sorrel, who could not be charged, was nonetheless sent from court that afternoon and did not return. Morwenna would keep her title and her seat at the high board. A king does not unmake his own marriage before a realm, but the machinery of her scheme was taken apart around her, wheel by wheel, and she stood in the middle of the wreckage of 10 years' patience with her smile finally wholly gone, and she understood, as we all did, that whatever she had been in this house, she would not be that again. Adela saw to it, in the weeks that followed, that she never was. Some reckonings are not a single blow. Some are a door quietly closing, and then staying closed. And then the king turned to the man by the door in the river grey, and the muddy boots. "Corporal Vale." Vale came to attention. "Your Majesty." "You left your post at a state banquet," said the king. "You knelt to a member of my family before 300 guests. You bound a keepsake to your own oath clasp on your own authority and told a Queen Consort to her face that she could not have it. By the letter of every rule this house owns, you disgraced your uniform." The old king looked at him for a long moment. "You are the only man in that hall who did not. Every other sworn guard, every lord, every lady, 300 people, watched a child of 9 weep alone and studied their plates. You alone remembered what the uniform is for. It is not for standing still while the small are made to suffer. It never was. You have taught this house its own oath back to it, and an old king is grateful." He restored Vale to the north wing that same hour over the head of no steward now, on the king's own word, and he did one thing more. He took, from the folds of his furs, the guardsman's oath clasp that Maelin had unfastened and handed him, the plain little silver clasp stamped with the arms of the house that Vale had given a frightened child at a feast, and he beckoned the corporal forward, and he pinned it back onto Vale's collar himself, with his own shaking royal hands. "You gave this to guard her," said the king, "and it did. Wear it. And, Corporal, you are, from this day, the appointed guard of my grandchildren's household. No one comes to those children in the dark again, not while you have the watch." Maelin could not be held back after that. She crossed the floor at a run and took hold of Vale's hand in both of hers, exactly as she had the night he walked her out of the silent hall, and she looked up at him, no tears now, only a fierce 9-year-old triumph, and she said, "I told you I could keep it a bit more knowing." "You did, your highness," said Corporal Edrin Vale, and went down on one knee to her one last time, there in front of the king and Princess Adela and the whole assembled court, not because any rule required it, but because he wanted to be at her height to say it. "You kept the whole house safe with 2 hands and a locket. There is not a soldier in this realm who did his duty better than you did yours. It was the greatest honor of my service to stand the watch beside you. That is the end of the affair, or near enough. The locket hangs at Maelin's throat to this day, on its guardsman's clasp, hers now in law and in truth and never to be surrendered, and inside it, once again, behind her father's painted baby face, there is a folded paper, though a different one now. Isolde's true will live safely in the house's records where the whole realm can see it." But Maelin asked, and the king granted, that a copy be made small, folded down to the size of a leaf, and set back into the locket where the original had lain, so that the keeper of the truth would go on being the keeper of the truth. She takes it out sometimes and unfolds it and reads her grandmother's last line to herself. "Guard it, little one. You are the keeper of the truth." She is a young woman now, and she guards it still. People in this house speak of the night the hall fell silent, as though the silence were the great thing. 300 of the powerful frozen, ashamed, staring at their plates. But I stood in that hall at the south pillar, and I have thought about it for years, and I have decided they have it backward. The silence was not the great thing. The silence was only the powerful of the realm agreeing all at once that a child's suffering was not their concern. There is nothing great in that. It is the commonest thing in the world. Any hall, any court, any gathering of comfortable people can produce that silence in a heartbeat, and most of them do, most of the time, and call it manners. The great thing was the sound that broke it. One pair of boots, walking. A single man stepping out of the safety of his stillness and crossing a vast cold floor because a small person was frightened and no one else would move. That is rarer than any jewel Isolde ever owned. I have served this house the better part of my life, and I have seen crowns and coronations and the great business of the realm, and I tell you that the finest thing I ever witnessed within these walls was a royal guard in a red tunic, going down on one knee on cold stone, so that a weeping child would not have to look up to him. He did not break protocol that night. That is the thing they never understand who tell it as a story of rules broken. The oath a guard swears is not to the rules, it is to what the rules are for. And when everything that mattered in that silent hall came down to whether one small girl would be left alone in her fear, Corporal Edrin Vale kept his oath more perfectly than any man who ever stood still. The hall fell silent when the young princess cried. And then a royal guard took action and reminded a whole house, and one tired king, and even a scheming queen, what the uniform had always been for. I was there. I saw it. And every winter since, when the amber hall is lit for a feast and 300 of the great and comfortable gather beneath the gilded ribs, I take my post at the south pillar, and I watch the north pillar where he stands, immaculate and unmoving. And I know, and he knows, and a young woman with a locket at her throat knows, that the stillness is only the setup. That if ever a child weeps again in that hall, and the powerful study their plates, there is a man who will come off that pillar and cross the whole cold floor, and go down on one knee, and take the frightened small thing under the guard of the house. That is what we are for. It took a 9-year-old's tears and one good man's boots to teach us. We will not need teaching again.